Alright, hello everybody and welcome to the last IFT 372 study session. Some of you have taken the final. There's definitely a couple more, so you may or may not be here. Just to go over it, again, we're mostly going to be focusing this for people who have not yet taken the final and are still looking over their practice exams for study material. So either looking ahead in the book, not so much ahead at this point since we're at the end, but looking in the book, looking at the homework, trying to figure out what they need to know. That's what this session is primarily for. So if you've taken the test already, good for you. Hopefully you did about where you expected to be. And if not, please contact us, either myself or Dr. Helm, if you have any questions about responses or things like that. Do keep in mind that Dr. Helm will be going over all the answers, whether or not you contact us or not, just to make sure there was no rounding problems or anything like that. So rounding issues will likely be addressed whether or not you contact us or not, but for other stuff, feel free to let us know and we'll take a look at it. And yeah, Steven's correct. Tomorrow midnight is the due date for the exam. So you have until tomorrow midnight Arizona time to take the exam, but I know a couple people have done it. Or at least more than there was at the beginning of the week. So again, we'll give it a couple minutes here for people to show up, and then we will go ahead and get started. Alright, we waited long enough, so let's go ahead and get started. So if you have any questions on the top of your list or head, whichever one, let's go ahead and get those out of the way first.
Well, I only have a few questions. Mostly wanted to make sure that I'd done questions correctly.
But yeah, sure, let's take a look at that. That works too. I will just briefly summarize what you did to get to your answer for other people's information. But yeah, we can take a look. For example, the core network for 4G LTE systems is based on an all-IP packet switch network. Question 48. Okay. IP packet. So okay. So to be clear. For question 48, the question is the core network for a 4G LTE system is based on blank. So that's the question as it is on the practice final. And then Steven went for IP-based, an all IP-based packet switch network. And yeah, that's essentially correct. That's not exactly what he has for the notes, but that's essentially right. What he technically has written down is an IP backbone, because if you look on page, where are we? Page 453 of the textbook, there's table 14.1, and it basically lists down based on the technology. So for example, the table has 1G, 2G, 2.5G, 3G, 4G, and then it lists the core network of each of them. So for example, for 1G, your core network is PSTN. For 2G, it's PSTN. For 2.5G, it's PSTN and then packet network. For 3G, it's packet network. And then 4G is an IP backbone. So the most important thing is kind of the distinction between the IP backbone for 4G and the packet network for 3G. Because 3G is actually a packet network, but 4G is just a backbone, an IP-based backbone. It's not really a packet network like 3G is. So I would be careful saying an all-IP packet switch network, just for that reason, potentially confusing 3G and 4G. Yeah, but you had the right idea, basically. Saying that 4G is packet switched is true, but it's more that it just uses IP. And again, that would be an answer that you could potentially argue. But I think, again, it comes down to like what we were talking about at the last session with like some of these questions. It comes down to best answer. And with this sort of a question, it's unlikely you would be left with... If you were left with a blank, you'd probably get some flexibility on what you were expected to, but because there's a table that has this exact definition in it, it's probably best to stick with what the table says. Hello, Spencer. I saw your email, Spencer. I've been pretty busy the last couple nights, so I haven't had time to get back to you yet, but I took a look at it, and I need to sit down and look at the math, but I think I remember having that issue come up before, and it was an order of operations thing, either on your part or the answer key. So I'll get back to you, hopefully, as soon as this is over this evening. I will get back to you with a response, or I'll forward it to Helm, who can take a look and see if he needs to change something on his end. Yeah, and that's why I want to get back to you tonight, so that you know for tomorrow. "43. Name 3 OFDMA disadvantages." Okay, yes, I remember this problem from last semester as well. So do you have any of them, any possible disadvantages listed out already, or are we looking at it from the start? Low PAPR, yep, and so that's definitely one. And so the PAPR is peak to average power ratio, and so that means you basically have, most of the time your power level is pretty low, but then all of a sudden when you have a peak of power, it is significantly higher than the average. And so that, if we want to walk that back a bit and make it a little bit more general, instead of saying specifically PAPR, we can say that the electronics are generally more complicated because you're dealing with high power spikes, but then usually low power level. You have to get electronics that can handle that kind of peaking, and so those are typically more complicated than something that is expected to just maintain a steady rate. But saying peak to average power ratio is absolutely correct. You could definitely phrase the question that way. That's also a sub. You could be saying the same thing if you said more complicated electronics or more expensive electronics, because you need more expensive electronics to handle the peak to average power ratio. But saying low peak to average power ratio is definitely one. Well, actually, so I think you're getting your answer from, where are we? From page 144 of the book. Okay, that second one, sorry, I'll come back to that in a second, but yeah, your second one's absolutely correct. Needs frequency synchronization. So yeah, that's absolutely correct. But just talking back to the low PAPR for a second, LFDMA has not a low PAPR, it has a relatively high one, because exactly what we were saying. So I guess I'll say relatively high peak to average power ratio, because the peak power is larger than the average power, and so your ratio is bigger. And I think what you were looking at when you said lower PAPR or low PAPR is looking at SC FDMA, which has a lower PAPR compared to OFDMA. And that's one of the advantages SC FDMA has over OFDMA, is that it has a lower PAPR. So a disadvantage of OFDMA would be that it has a relatively high PAPR compared to other methods like SC FDMA. But otherwise, you're right with the idea that PAPR is a concern. Yeah, and that's because the PAPR is higher, which means the electronics need to do more work. And so that's what we were saying with the more complex electronics. Because the electronics need to be more powerful, then they need to be working, basically, the more powerful the electronics, the faster the battery drain. So you're right, your understanding was right. It was because of the high PAPR that the battery dies more quickly than SCFDMA. So yeah, you're right with that understanding. And not sure about the third one. Okay. So one of the options you have for the third one is, again, related to the electronics that we're talking about, the kind of technology that we need, is, yeah, I would say, like what you said, is the expensive electronics. Because if we look at page, where are we? 142 in the book, when it starts talking about the OFDM implementation. And again, OFDM is concerned, we're concerned about OFDM when we talk about OFDMA because they are so similar. And of course, you need, OFDMA uses OFDM. It's like the square being a rectangle. If you're using OFDMA, you're definitely using OFDM. But if you're using OFDM, you may not be using OFDMA. But so one of the consequences of OFDM, since we're always using it for OFDMA, is that, where are we? I just had it, 142, right? We're talking about, in order to implement OFDM, we need to take advantage of the fast Fourier transform and inverse fast Fourier transform. And so we need to have equipment that can support that. We can't just have soft basic electronics. We need software that can, what's the word I'm looking for? Implement fast Fourier transforms. But you don't even need to get that specific with it. You can just say complex electronics to implement OFDM. Or like you said, Stephen, the other option would be power consumption. Relatively high power consumption. And that's related to the electronics. So you can kind of generalize out from the electronics a couple different things. Because of the PAPR, we need better electronics. Those better electronics are also needed in order to implement OFDM with the fast transforms. I think that's spelled right. That's how I would spell. No, man. So yeah, those are just generally the 3 or 4 just general disadvantages to OFDMA. So that would be sufficient. A combination of those 3 would likely be sufficient. So Spencer, for 61, I see that the book talks about OFDMA using TDMA, FDMA, and CSMA, but not CDMA. I was wondering if it talks about CDMA somewhere else. I was looking on page 143, 144. Okay. So going back to the original question, question 61. So yeah, TDMA and FDMA are the big ones that we always talk about when we're talking about OFDMA. Or OFDMA. But then CDMA is not part of OFDMA. It's something different, and that's where, so let me draw it out here. Okay, so OFDMA incorporates A, TDMA, B, I'm gonna run out of space, FDMA, C, CDMA, D, all, E, none. So like you said, Spencer, TDMA and FDMA are definitely involved with OFDMA, because with OFDMA you're basically splitting into multiple subcarriers at certain times, and so that's TDMA and FDMA concepts. So TDMA and FDMA are included. So that means A and B. Oh, I see. And so the tricky thing is about this problem is that it's not necessarily just picking one. You could pick two of them. Because CDMA is not, like you said, CSMA is technically involved, but CDMA isn't. So in this case, I would say just A and B, TDMA and FDMA. I don't think if you had a quiz, if on the quiz you were only allowed to pick one of the answers, if this was a pick one, you wouldn't have two possible answers generally. And so that would be, it doesn't explicitly say it, but just reading the question and, like you said, having the answers, knowing what you know, I think you just have to take this as a problem where you can pick two answers that work for you. I can see why that would be confusing and why you would. Yeah, it's hard to say how this problem would be set up, because of course you're not actually looking at it like it's on Blackboard, so you don't know for sure. My guess, because like you said, the best answer here is definitely just A and B. I could see a way that you could potentially argue that the orthogonality of OFDMA is similar to CDMA, but that would be a real stretch, and I don't think that would be the best answer. So yeah, I think the best answer for this one is A and B, even though there's not one dedicated option for it. I think on the proper quiz you would have, it would be either set up in a way such that you could pick A and B, or it would be set up such that A and B would be included in the all option. I think if you had to pick only one there, you would pick all. If you absolutely had to, because TDMA, again, it's really hard, because none is certainly not the right answer. CDMA is a stretch. So if you had to pick one, all is probably your best answer. But if you could pick two, like you said, A and B would be the best answer. How about 44? The main idea of OFDMA is to share OFDM symbols among several users at the same time. Briefly describe how this is accomplished with the three attributes: subcarrier, data rates, power. Okay. So what do you have so far? Let me clear some space. So that's basically the question is telling us that the three things we need to focus on for when we're talking about OFDMA is subcarrier, data rates, and power levels. I think that's what the rest of that sentence says. Yeah, power levels. Okay. Let me clear some space. Okay, so many subcarriers are dedicated to a single data source. That's true. Now remember, we're talking about OFDMA, not necessarily just OFDM. So we want to be careful if we're describing OFDM or OFDMA. So let me look and make sure. So basically, let me rewrite this down so that we know what 3 attributes we want to focus on. And it does say briefly, so we don't have to go into too much detail. Okay. Okay, so basically, when we're looking at OFDMA, OFDM, we have subcarriers. And with OFDMA, we still have those subcarriers. OFDM gives us multiple closely spaced subcarriers. So again, if there's diagrams, I don't have. OFDM uses closely spaced subcarriers, and then OFDMA does the same thing, but basically groups those subcarriers into subchannels. And this is, I'm generally kind of looking at page 246 and just kind of paraphrasing it. So if you're looking at this later and you want to kind of cover what we're looking at, page 246 is what I'm generally pulling from when I'm talking about this. So OFDMA uses groups of OFDM, and again, this is just me paraphrasing. It's not super important that you obviously copy this down word for word, but I'm just generally summarizing what's on page 246. So OFDMA uses groups of OFDM subcarriers and the book goes into detail and says it's not computationally feasible because of hundreds of subcarriers or sufficient to schedule by individual subcarriers, so that's why we group them together. And then it says in the uplink, a transmitter may be assigned one or more subchannels. So we can say that device users or devices are assigned subchannel groups as needed for transmission or reception. And that's again on 246. It talks about in the downlink a subchannel may be intended for different receivers. In the uplink, a transmitter may be assigned one or more subchannels. And so So let me actually rephrase that because that's not quite. User or devices are assigned subchannel groups as needed for transmission and can listen to the same, or we'll say, and can share subchannel groups on reception. That's a bit better. And so this is basically talking how OFDM-A uses OFDM, or how it works in general. You're taking groups of subcarriers from OFDM and then assigning multiple devices either exclusive use of subchannels for transmission or subchannel groups, or basically setting multiple devices to listen to the same subchannels for reception. And then in regards to power level, at the end of that paragraph on 246, it mentions subchannelization in the uplink can save user device transmit power because it can concentrate power only on certain subchannels allocated to it. And so, let me see if it gives. Yeah, that's about it. So I would then, from that, I would say that power levels, or power, is assigned to subchannels, subchannel groups as needed, allowing power to be focused. Power. Or a focus. Again, I'm live paraphrasing, so power is assigned to subchannel groups as needed, allowing for powerful, and I guess we'll say narrow broadcasts, or weaker wide transmission. I guess we could also, instead of saying weaker transmission, we could say high capacity, high bandwidth. And I think that basically just summarizing up what it says on 246 would generally be sufficient. So, because we're addressing all the three things that we were asked to describe OFDM-A with. So OFDM-A uses groups of OFDM subcarriers. So again, like 246 says, instead of having to look at all the individual subcarriers we use for OFDM, which could be hundreds of them, we just basically combine them into groups, which makes us have to worry about less objects or less channels. Users or devices are assigned subchannel groups as needed for transmission, and can share subchannel groups on reception. Power is assigned to subchannel groups as needed, allowing for powerful narrow broadcasts or high bandwidth transmissions. And so that's basically talking about power levels and data rates there. It's saying that we can either, if we want a higher data rate, we can use more subchannels. And so that's part of the multiple access. We can either if we're talking about the download or the receiving data rate, that one receiver can listen to multiple subchannels at once, and so that means it can have a higher data rate. Or if we're transmitting, we give the transmitter more frequency bands to transmit on, and that increases its data rate. And then also power levels, basically, we can either focus our transmitter power on a particular subchannel group, and that'll make it stronger, or if we disperse it over many subchannels, then we're using less power for each and it'll be weaker. So this question is, again, more of just having you remember what is OFDM-A, what is OFDM, and what sets it apart. And again, most of that explanation came from 246, or most of that summary came from 246. Page 246. Yeah, some of those words are not words we would typically use to describe it, like data rates and power levels. We don't typically think about OFDMA that way. Data rates are a little bit closer. Power levels get weird to try to talk about it that way because the book doesn't go into that much detail about it. But you can generally think of the concept where, like with just basic transmissions, if we focus on a particular narrow bandwidth, then we can use what power we have much more effectively than if we try to spread it out. And that's basically the same with OFDMA. If you're giving a transmitter access to multiple subgroups, then it has to broadcast over multiple subgroups, and it obviously only has so much power to give. And again, I wouldn't worry too much about like using those specific 3 words to detail it. Just kind of know, okay, OFDMA is using subchannels of, or groups of subchannels of OFDM. You can assign the subchannel groups as needed, and that's what sets it apart. That's what allows it to support higher data rates. And again, the power efficiency is kind of relative because it's higher power consumption than some of the other basic FDMA and TDMA, but the data rate you get out of it is better as well. So it's hard to say one is outright better than the other. But OFDM and OFDMA are OFDM specifically is pretty popular today, like we talked about in one of the prior problems where it's talking about the technology that is being currently implemented across WiMAX or Wi-Fi and cellular technologies, and it's OFDM because you can do things with OFDM and OFDMA that you couldn't do with 3G and even, well, definitely 1G, definitely 2G, even 3G. OFDM is making much more, or you have many more advantages with OFDM, and some of those trade-offs are acceptable. So we probably have about time for 1 or 2 more questions, so if you have them. And again, this is not the be-all and end-all. If you have questions between now and when you take the test tomorrow, feel free to email me. I will not be busy tonight and tomorrow, so I should be able to get back to it. And I'll make an effort to tomorrow get back to you as promptly as I can, because I know tomorrow's a deadline and it'll be stressful enough without having to wait on me to answer a last-minute question. So I'm going to be on email today and tomorrow, definitely, to make sure I can provide last-minute help. Okay, so yeah, let's look at what you've got before we wrap up here. So let me see. You have yeah. It'll be good to be done, right? Alright, so 49. I assume D is your answer that you got for 49, so let me take a look. So for 49, let me write this here. The keyword of the problem for 49 is So modern digital comm systems, communication systems use blank antenna. Let me make my point visually. Technology singular to create spatial diversity. So the keywords with this question are antennas and spatial diversity. 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 There we go. And so where are we? Again, we're talking about antennas specifically because the question says this is a particular type of antenna technology. So, 1 second. Sorry about that. I kept going back and forth between MIMO and none. So just to clarify, you ended up picking log periodic? Stephen? Spencer went with MIMO, but Stephen, you went with D, which is log periodic, is that right? Because if you're going back and forth between MIMO and none, because yeah, Spencer, I think generally the best answer here is MIMO, like you said, Spencer. I just want to clarify what Stephen's saying, because if Stephen was going back and forth between MIMO and none, then it sounds like you are on the right track too. I'm not sure. It seems like you jumped to D because you weren't sure. And the reason that MIMO is generally the best answer is because when we're talking about spatial diversity, modern MIMO takes advantage of multipath propagation. Because again, if you're sending the signal out over multiple, either if you're using multiple antennas, or if you're just basically taking advantage of Okay, maybe I'm looking at an older, I might be looking at the wrong test form because, oh, I'm looking at the wrong test. There you go. The one I'm looking at has an extra answer. But yeah, I think if on your guys' version of the test, my notes are old, I should be looking at the newer version of the notes. I didn't realize they were that different. But yeah, MIMO, like you said, is whether or not it was a side effect is kind of questionable. But the main purpose of MIMO is to take advantage of multipath propagation. And with multipath propagation, the signal is different based on where it is in space, right? And so that would be the spatial diversity. Having multiple antennas or taking advantage of multipath propagation, you are creating spatial diversity. You're making the signal diverse in space. And so yeah, MIMO I think is the best answer there. Log periodic are a type of antenna that is primarily used to increase the bandwidth or increase the spectrum that you're using. So it doesn't really affect the spatial diversity so much as it just lets you use you're not taking advantage of the multipath in the same way. You're sending out a signal. It's over a wider frequencies. It's over a wide band of frequencies. It has a big bandwidth, but it's the same signal wherever you are relative to it in space. You're not deliberately taking advantage of the multipath as much as a MIMO system is. You'll of course get it if you go into an area that causes a lot of scattering or reflections. You will get spatial diversity, but that's not your goal. You'd get that with the MIMO too, and it would still make things worse. So let me write that down. Oops, not there. C, MIMO. And MIMO is just generally the best fit for antenna technology and spatial diversity. And then what else did you have? You had 55 was, you put false. Let me take a look. What is 55? So Rayleigh, or question 55, and I think this just might be a vocab thing. Question number 55, Rayleigh, oops. PDF, probability density function, does not include a direct path signal. True or false? And so again, there's two types of, I guess you could call it fading. Yeah, fading is the best answer. There's Rayleigh and Rician, however you want to pronounce it. And so, can either of you remember or describe to me what is Rayleigh? When we say we have a Rayleigh channel or we have Rayleigh fading, what do we generally mean? And this is on page 187 if you need to look it up. because that's what I'm going to be referring to, 187. So when we're talking about Rayleigh, and I think you did an activity on this, but it wasn't necessarily super clear. I think you were implementing a Rayleigh channel or something to that effect. So again, we're just talking about Rayleigh right now. You can either go to the page in the book or check your notes or your mind. But these are the two general types of fading that we talk about. We talk about Rayleigh and Riccian. For MATLAB, you have the Rayleigh and Riccian channels. These are generally the two situations that we deal with. Okay, so Steven says Rayleigh is multiple indirect paths. Riccian is a direct path plus additional indirect paths. Yeah, that's right. So Rayleigh is multiple indirect paths. Riccian is multiple indirect plus direct. And the direct can be line of sight. It can be, generally it's line of sight. So you can see directly, there's nothing between you and the signal. Rayleigh just means that you can't see where this original signal is coming from. You're only getting reflections. Sorry about that. Reflections or echoes of the signal. And so the question for 55 says a Rayleigh probability density function does not include a direct path signal. So 55 is actually true. I think you just might be misreading 55. 55 says a Rayleigh PDF does not include a direct path. Is that true or false? And like you said, Rayleigh has no distinct dominant path. So I think you're just misreading something, or you're overthinking the question. Because with Rayleigh, we don't necessarily we don't have one super clear signal. It's basically, 55 is basically saying, does a Rayleigh PDF have a line of sight path? And that answer is no, because Rayleigh is just reflections. So we don't really have, we don't have a, of course, generally always we're going to have one signal that's stronger than the others, right? Just for whatever coincidence of nature, one of the signals is going to be our primary signal, but it's not going to be that noticeably powerful. So like, for example, let me see if an illustration helps get this point across. If we have a receiver here and a transmitter here and a wall, hang on, this is not going to go the way I want it to go, but all right, let's, oh boy, okay, move this up there, move that down there, okay. So again, we have a transmitter here, and a receiver here. And let's pretend that that's actually a solid wall. There's no line of sight. So if this is our situation, we're going to have a reflection, or we may have, but let's assume we have a reflection here and a reflection here. Now, this signal down here is probably going to be stronger this bottom signal is probably going to be stronger than this top one because it has to travel less distance. But it's still not a distinctly dominant path. It would be way more powerful if it didn't have the bounce at all. Because you can think about water waves, and I think they do this experiment. If a water wave hits something and bounces off, it's going to be a lot weaker after it bounces than it was going directly. It loses energy when it changes direction. And so if we had a straight path straight through, let me make that red. If we had a straight path, there's going to be no energy loss due to the bounces at all. And so that path is going to be noticeably more powerful than the other two. And so the order of the strengths would be direct path, shorter path, longest path, 1, 2, 3. And so Rayleigh will have a primary, or it'll have a signal that's more powerful than the others, but it won't have a standout dominant path. Rician, though, has one path, the middle path, that's way stronger than the others because it didn't reflect. If that path didn't reflect, it's going to have a lot more energy than the other paths are going to. Because it may not just be one bounce, right? It could be multiple bounces, and if it's losing energy at each bounce, that path that didn't bounce is going to be way stronger. And so for 55, the answer is true. Rayleigh does not include a direct path signal. It doesn't include a line of sight signal. It doesn't include a dominant path. 55 just says direct path. So yeah, for Rayleigh, there is no signal that goes straight from transmitter to receiver. It has to come from a bounce. It has to be a reflection or a multipath situation. But for Rician, for 56, that's true. It's basically, you have a reflection situation, you have a Rayleigh situation, but you also have a direct path signal. And so you're right that 56 is absolutely true, but 55 is also true because Rayleigh probability functions do not have a direct path. And again, that's on page 187. Kind of talks about the distinction between the two. I think you did too, because if you understand that Rician does include a direct wave signal, and you did, because 56, yeah, you seem to understand 56. So I think you were just overthinking 55 and not understanding what it meant by a direct path. So yeah, with Rayleigh, there is no direct line of sight between the transmitter and the receiver. The only way they can communicate is through reflections. What is probability density referring to? The expected density strength of the signal? Basically, yeah. It's basically saying how likely it is that the signal will be somewhere. It's not too important to know what the exact probability. You can basically... Let me give you a better explanation than that. You're basically looking at how strong the signal is going to be either at a given point or the given likelihood that you have the signal at a certain strength at a certain point. It's basically just a way, if you remember back to when we were creating the channels in MATLAB, you're basically saying, how do I handle this channel? So if you, for example, sampled a bunch of, I guess you could say time samples, but that's a little weird. The MATLAB activities referred to it in a way that I think made more sense, but I can't recall what that was off the top of my head. Again, the specifics aren't super important for this question. It's mostly just asking if you can tell the difference and can distinguish a Ricean versus a Rayleigh channel. So as long as you know that Rayleigh does not have a direct path and it consists of multiple indirect paths, and Ricean includes multiple indirect paths and a direct line of sight path, that's about all you will need to know for the Rayleigh versus Ricean distinction. Yeah, good luck, both of you. It will not be, you've likely over-prepared yourselves for it, but again, all the work you put into it will be valuable, right? You can't too badly overthink yourself on this one. If you've done review, and again, if you've done the practice final, you'll be in a pretty good situation. You'll be pretty prepared to take the test, so. Yeah, this and again, yeah, like you said, this is a tricky class. This is pretty different from what the other things you've had to do in the program. But again, I do, obviously I've enjoyed it a bit because I've come back and TA'd for it 3 times now. So it is something, I like it just because it is unique. It's something that you don't do in the rest of the program, but I know that it's not for everybody. But yeah, good luck to you guys. Again, like Steven said, good luck to you guys going forward. I can now talk intelligently about the point-to-point system. Yeah, you see, it is important. Some people complain that it's not relevant. We're talking about wireless isn't relevant, but it's insightful. It adds a little bit more understanding about what's going on. But just out of curiosity, are either of you two doing the capstone next semester in the fall? Just idle curiosity before I wrap this one up for today. Steven says, I can't tell if that's, I think that's an ugh, not a, I don't know. Yeah, I don't know what type of project to do for it though. Well, good news is, well, good news or bad news, I guess, I'm going to be, you'll be taking 401 this spring. Okay, I might miss you, Spencer, but Steven, I'll be TAing for 401 in the fall and 402 in the spring. But yeah, I can't remember if the online one is group project focused, but I would just try, if you, the easiest way or the most interesting way, yeah, the description for the course is very vague. The easiest way is to find, especially if you're doing, like you said, you can talk about the point-to-point system we use between offices. If you have a job or you're working in IT or computer related at some point, the easiest way is to pick a project that you can do through work and get it done that way, because that gives you a focus and a direction. But other than that, I wouldn't worry too much about having a project idea in your head right now. I can't remember if you guys pair up, if they want you to pair up online or not. I probably should know this before I hit the class, but I think you can either work with somebody who has a project idea or come up with one on your own. But I would definitely suggest taking a look at if you have a work situation that's inducive to you being able to say like, hey, I need a project idea, or I want to do something as a capstone project. Doing something that you know and that will interest you is obviously important no matter what you end up picking. So it really is just kind of, as long as you can pick an idea and persuade us that it's a good project and that it'll be challenging, it's achievable in the time frame is probably one of the more important parts too. 401 isn't, you have some time when 401 starts to nail down your idea, but basically 401 is just selling us on the idea that you have a good project, that you have something you haven't necessarily done before, or you're reaching out and trying something new, but you can also potentially achieve it in the time period. Yeah, I can take a look and see what I had for my 401 papers too, but yeah, you're pretty free to pick what you want to do as long as it's, I keep saying a good project, like that's a meaningful phrase, but there were a lot of different project ideas for last semester's capstone. All right. Now that was just pure curiosity. I was curious to see if I'd have any of you guys next semester, but yes, I mean something like that. As long as you can achieve it within the time period and kind of get familiar with the technology, that would be a cool project to do, because it would teach you something and it would potentially be valuable to somebody somewhere. The only specific advice I can give you at this point is to use GitHub or some sort of version control software, because that makes our job easier and it makes your job, especially if you're coordinating with somebody, a lot easier. But if either of you have any other questions about that, you can email me at some point whenever you start doing it, and I can, especially you, Steven, because I will probably be the TA for your specific class. But all right, I think I'm going to wrap it up now, since we've gone a little bit over and we're not really talking about 372 anymore, which isn't a bad thing, but now is not necessarily, these sessions are not necessarily the time to chat. So again, sum up what we So again, just to repeat what we kind of went over before we spread out, good luck, and don't worry about it too much. You guys should be prepared if you did the final practice. So good night and good luck tomorrow. Email me. I'll get back to you, Spencer, but email me if you have any other issues. All right. Thanks, guys. Bye.